All right, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's another edition of the Leadership Blend with your host Ricardo D. Rice. Yes, it was. That should tell you how long my weekend was. That should tell you how long it was. It was a very long weekend, but a lot of things got done, a lot of things got achieved. So I am excited to be here on today. All right, so. Again, very long weekend, but I will say this weekend I had very good conversations, and these conversations I realized what I want to talk about today. So this weekend I was having a good conversation with a very good friend and long-term friend about ministry, and I realized, okay, well, you're on an AM station and you really never talk about ministry. So today, I want to make correlations about the stuff that I talk about on a weekly basis about leadership and management and all those good things. So today, we're going to be talking about how to correlate ministry and making your ministry a full-fledged organization. Well, what does that mean? Typically, a lot of people that I in my circle are pastors, apostles, bishops, and we have these conversations all the time about struggling to get leadership to be cooperative or executing a vision that God has given us or understanding the dynamics of a vision that is God given. And when I say God given, it means in the arenas of pastors, apostles, bishops, those kinds of giftings, evangelists, prophets, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, and this is where it gets really murky because people really are like, well, I have a church and I don't want to be worldly and blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is your church is still a thriving, running organization, and it has to be run as such. Meaning, you should have boards. You should have auxiliaries. You should have a organizational structure in place that people can refer to, so that when you're having new members and you're trying to build something, people know what the vision is. They understand what the vision is, and they understand how to execute said vision. So in order to do that, you must first have a plan. And yes, God gives us the vision, but God also expects you to do the research and to understand how to build an organization, especially for my bishops and my apostles, because that's primarily a lot of your job is to go out and set up works and ministries and all those good things. So today I really want to talk about the things that we don't talk about when it comes to running organizations. Accountability. Yes, you're the pastor, you're the apostle, but you still should be accountable to someone, and not just for legal purposes, but also that someone can say, hey, I understand what you're trying to do, but this may not be the best route to get it done. And again, yes, God gives us vision, but God also wants us to, but the government, let me say that, the government wants you to have checks and balances in place so that you're not getting raided or being audited by the IRS and you have no books. You have no records. You cannot show where your church dollars are going. And I think a lot of this plays into the bigger picture of why ministries are seeing a great fall away. Yes, there are other biblical proportions that play into it. But when you get down to hard, cold facts, and what it looks like for a parishioner that's a member of your church who doesn't understand, where the tithes are going, who doesn't understand, what the vision is. These are all problems that a organization can have. So again, that's the kind of stuff I really want to talk about today. And I also want to get into branding, because the funniest thing I hear in churches is when preachers who may not be on a certain level get up and make references to people who've studied and researched their craft and executed the vision that God has given them to a greater plateau, and they, start saying things, oh, they're not called, and, I don't want to be taking tithes and blah, 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 and doing things of that magnitude. But in reality, it's about good branding. And when you start getting into speakers on the level of T.D. Jakes and Creflo Dollar, those men of God have understood what it takes to brand not only their ministries, but themselves. Yes, you can brand yourself. So when you see a book that comes out from T.D. Jakes, that's his brand. When you see the Potter's House, that's his organization. So there are levels to understanding branding. And sometimes I think we limit ourselves, especially those of us who have great callings and have been called to ministry on a whole nother plateau and a whole nother magnitude. We limit ourselves. So we don't brand ourselves. We don't write the books with, executing the thoughts and process that God has given us. So we miss out on great opportunities to bring in revenue. Yes, that is not a dirty word, people. Revenue is not a dirty word in ministry. Even nonprofits are expected to bring in some, and I've just talked about this before. Even nonprofits are expected to bring in some level of revenue for operating costs. So a church is a nonprofit organization. Yes, believe it or not, a church is a nonprofit organization. So the government still expects you to bring in some level of revenue. And then today, I also want to segment into 501c3s. You know, should your ministry have one? If you do want one, you know, what would you need to do to start expediting that process? All that good stuff. So those are the kind of things I want to go over today. I want to show you, for those of us that are in ministry and have a desire to build a church or to build an organization, I want to walk you through that process of what it looks like, because, you know, it can be done. People do it all the time, and people have learned how to do it well. So that's what I want to discuss today. So let's get into it. And also, one of my interns here, she thinks she's going to text all day. She's not. So you can say hello. Go ahead, get your mic and say hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shamir. I'm Ricardo's intern. I'm here to just, you know, listen and chime in. So, yeah.
You got to train them. You got to train them. You got to teach them. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Shamir, I'm so used to Shanae being here all the time. Shamir, tell me, what does branding mean to you? What does that mean? Off the top of your head. I'm putting you on the spot for a reason, because I want to show. If I say the word branding to you, what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
Branding means to basically kind of like just, I guess, contribute to something in a way, like contribute to people in some type of way, like trying to reach people like everywhere, like making sure people see whatever your, like, I guess, product or whatever you're promoting, making sure everyone like sees it and gets it. Is that what branding is? I
mean, there's no wrong answer. Okay. I just you get to be my everyday person today. So, you know, with the stuff that I'm discussing, I want to show how people think. Okay. So when I say the word branding, you know, that was the first thing that came to your head, and that's not wrong. Branding is, you know, having people understand what you do, who you are, why you do what you do. It's kind of the who, what, when, why, where. Yeah. That's the best place to start with branding, because I know people go, well, you know, what is branding and blah, blah, blah. That's kind of what it is. When you walk out and you have a business and you say, my business is XYZ, or I am XYZ, in essence, you're talking about your brand, what you do, what your organization is, who you are. That's, in essence, what a brand is. In a simple term, I want to keep it really simple today. So we'll take it to ministry. When you have a ministry, and let's say the name, I'm just going to throw one out there. So I'm not saying anybody's church, I'm just throwing it out there. So if your ministry's church name is, let's say your church name is Holy Deliverance Tabernacle. And, you know, you're out and about and you're doing the work of an evangelist, and you say, hey, you know, I have a church and this is Holy Deliverance Tabernacle. You're talking about what you do, what you have. That's, in essence, branding, you know. So when you pass out business cards and you know, you build a website, all that is branding. So why is that important? Why do you think that's important?
Are you asking?
I'm talking to you.
Oh.
You get to be the guinea pig today, so you have to answer a lot of questions today.
You said why is
the branding important? What does it do? What do you think branding does?
It honestly helps people. Like, if you have a business, like, what's the point of having a business if you know, it isn't to help people? Like, I feel like having a business, like, it would be a waste of time, a waste of money if you didn't, like, have the customers, you know, supporting you. And in order to, like, have customers, they have to be able to like your product. And, you know, yeah. I feel like it would be a waste of time, like, if you're just doing it just because. Like, you have to attract people in some way, some form. So.
Well, that was, and actually, I will piggyback off that. That was the best statement I heard this weekend. One of my newfound mentors made the statement, which I got my butt kicked this weekend, but that's a whole nother topic. She made the statement, she said, if you have a business and you're not making money, you have an expensive hobby. Yeah. And she's absolutely right. A lot of times we have businesses, we have business plans, we have thoughts, process that have been given to us by the big man upstairs, and we never maximize them. So it's just money just sitting there. You know, many of us have books, and I will say as somebody who just wrote one, and that was a long process in itself, because I, for a long time, didn't think I should or could. And then when I actually sat down and did it, the process was not that hard. And I did self-publish for my first one. I promise you the second one will be through a publisher, because it just will be. But, you know, we put things off, and a lot of times we're begging God for insight. Well, Lord, I know I should have money, and I know things should be coming in, and God is sitting there kind of looking at you going, I gave you the plans and the thought processes to do whatever you need to do to find an outlet by which to bring in revenue, because that is one of our goals. Again, even in ministry, nobody wants to be broke, busted, and disgusted in ministry. And that has nothing to do solely with you taking the tithes from the church. Now, do I believe that if your church is structured right, the tithes and offering will cover the leader? Yes. And I think oftentimes we're afraid of the word revenue in ministry. Oh, well, I shouldn't make a lot of money, or, I shouldn't be taking the church tithes. Again, structure. Putting these things in place so that the lights are kept on, the saints are fed appropriately, and the leader is taken care of. Because again, even with nonprofits, when you do your budget, you budget in for at least 3 people to be full-time employees of your organization. So these things are not foreign concepts. We just don't take the time to research and understand them. So let's start from the beginning. What does your church do? Yes, a church has a primary function. I don't want to call it cliche, but for lack of a better term, it's the cliche thing we hear. Well, I want to, set the captives free, and I want people to be healed and delivered. All those things are absolutely great. Those are your baseline processes for starting a ministry. But most ministries have a specialization. What does that mean? It's the same thing I talk about when I talk about your marketing plan and your business plan. With your ministry, God has called you to some field, whether that be veterans, military, maybe it's a men's type church where you focus, your specialization is healing broken men, or your specialization is healing broken women. Most people have a ministry that has some level of specialization that God has called you to. And oftentimes we don't take the time to understand that. It's the same thing in a for-profit organization. You have to discover what your niche is so that you can do your marketing plan, you can do your business plan based off that niche, because it allows you to find your area in your market. Yes, there are a lot of churches. There are supposed to be a lot of churches because there are a lot of broken people and there are a lot of people that need to be healed. But when you find your niche that God has given you, then it gives you a special edge that you can say, hey, when you pass out those business cards, hey, my ministry focuses, we include everybody. We're all encompassing, which we should be, because we've been called to a ministry. And that is the very definition of ministry, to be all encompassing, to bring insight, special earthly insight from the big man upstairs. I like that term. You'll find me say that a lot today, big man upstairs. So when you pass out your business cards, you want to be able to say, because again, you have to have a mission statement even for your church. Yes, you have to have a mission statement even for your church. It is, if you don't learn anything else today from this broadcast today, your church is an organization. Your organization should run appropriately, which means it is not exempt from the things that an organization has to do, including a nonprofit. A nonprofit is an organization. I'm going to drill that home today. Your nonprofit is an organization. So on that note, I'm going to take my first break, and when I come back, we're going to really get into it. So stick around on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I didn't want to ask it on air, but how do you feel about pastors that kind of not bribe people, but really beg for tithes and offering?
That's a part of structural problems. You shouldn't have to do that. If your church is designed and structured the right way, that shouldn't be a problem. But a lot of times our churches are not structured that way. So tithes and offerings come in, they just kind of go places. Nobody really has a plan on where they're supposed to go. They pay the bills, but there's never a plan in place that says, hey, a budget is never in place that says, we want to bring in $1,000. Mm-hmm. The utilities are $500. Mm-hmm. 300 of that will go to the auxiliaries. Mm-hmm. And to start off, we'll pay $200 every week or every 2 weeks to the pastor. That's their salary. That's budgeted in to their budget. But a lot of times these churches don't even have budgets. They just kind of take up offerings, and there's no goals, there's no objectives. So they just take up tithes and offerings, and there's no goal. People are visual. They want to see things.
So do pastors have other jobs? They make their money off of their church?
They should. Again,
that's why sometimes they beg, I need tithes and offering. Can you guys please, give more than what you gave last Sunday? Because, the church I go to, they kind of do that. And I always wonder, are they, in the financial crisis right now. Like, I don't know.
Well, again, and that's the purpose of the day, because these are organizations.
Yeah.
And with organizations, you have to have budgets.
Yeah.
So that you will know what you need to bring in. So if you do a budget, you say, okay, and you will see a lot of the bigger Baptist churches and stuff do this.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, our budget is $10,000. People know what it is.
Yeah.
They find themselves in it. They give accordingly. You don't find a lot of those churches having to beg for offerings, because the people understand what's expected of them.
Mm-hmm.
The people know what their obligations are, and they do it.
Okay.
So, but a lot of these other churches. All right, everybody, we are back on today's show, which is making the connection between church ministry or church and, for lack of a better term, I'll say the world. Because that's kind of what people like to say. Oh, that's worldly, blah, 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 blah. So today's purpose of this show is to make the correlation from the stuff that I talk about from the business aspect to correlate it with ministry, because they're not mutually exclusive. And like I said before we took the break, if you don't learn anything else today, especially for all my pastor friends and my ministry friends, if you don't take anything else away from this broadcast today, take away that ministry is still, and church is still an organization, and it has to be run as such. So when I left, I was getting into the ground foundation. So I'm going to use the same questions I would use if I were talking about a for-profit or a non-profit. So let's start from the basics. So if I were sitting down doing a consult for a person who has a new idea for a for-profit, I would ask them these same questions. So I'm going to pose these same questions to you. Now, be mindful. You are welcome to call in today and ask questions, or because Shamir had questions over the break, which I'm going to let her ask because people think like this. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to let her ask those questions, and I'm going to answer those questions in a few minutes. But you're welcome to call in today, 404-355-8699. To all my people who are in ministries and God is calling you to start a church and you have no idea how to start one, but you really want to be successful at it, feel free to call in. Let's talk about it. I can give you some ideas, all that good stuff. So again, if I were to sit down and do a consult for somebody who wants to start a for-profit organization, these are the kind of questions I would ask them. So I'm going to pose these same questions to ministry. So my first question would be, what is your product? And I know somebody will say, well, I have a church. That's beautiful. But again, what is your product? What is your church going to offer? Okay, let's use an example, because I know I'm big on examples. So let's say you have a ministry, you start a church, and you recognize that your passion is for kids. So you make your church family friendly. So you say, hey, this name of my church is, I'm trying to remember the example I used. Like I said, Holy Deliverance Tabernacle. I don't know if that really exists, but that's the example I'm using today. Okay, Shamir, so you have to remind me what the example is, because I'm bad about that.
Okay.
So let's say that's the example. So you go out and you say, okay, well, hey, God has given me a vision, and that vision is to start a ministry or a church. And that church, I want to focus on children. So that's my specialization. So you have to think. Following along with that ideology, then you have to take the next step. So if I'm going to focus on children, that cannot exclude parents. So I'm probably going to have to be a family-friendly church, because that's how I'm going to be able to focus on children. Why do I say that? Because children can't drive themselves to church. Children cannot give tithes and offering. Children cannot do those things. So you have, when you say that, then you automatically have to take the next step and say, okay, well, I'm going to have a family-friendly church, because that's the way I'm going to be able to bring the children into the ministry. Now, you will find other avenues, but again, this is where you're starting from. So your product has to revolve around children. So you say, okay, I want to have a ministry that focuses on children. What do children need? Well, or what do parents that have children need? Shamir, I'm going to use, since you're here. So given that example, what would you think? If your ministry is going to be children friendly, so you have to include the parents, what do children need?
They need a center that they can go to while their parents are in service, so that they don't distract them.
And all right, that's one. What else?
They need, what is there to be in the center, or just in general?
Just in general. So if you say that you're going to focus on children, mm-hmm. and that means you're going to have to focus on families.
Oh.
What do families need that have children?
I would say, it may not make sense, but Bible study for the children.
Listen, there are no wrong answers. You get to be the everyday person today. So I want to, because I know people don't think like I do, because of going to school and studying this stuff up the wazoo. I know that my thought process can be out there, because I've trained my brain to think like that. But that's not the purpose of this. Today's show is to make it very practical. So that's what we're talking about. So what else?
I would say like youth dances and like youth plays. Like I'm just thinking about like youth services.
And that's a good thing. So again, that's how you start a think tank, what we call a think tank. What's a think tank? When you start tossing around ideas. Now, remember, you want to write these things down. Do not just have them floating around in your head. Because when you write something down, you can go back to it. You can make reference to it. You can look at it. So you definitely want to pull out your pen and pad. And let me throw that out there. So whenever God gives you a vision or whenever God gives you insight on something, write it down. I learned that lesson the hard way. Because what happened, and many of you know my story about starting my nonprofit, what happened was I had ideas that I could not execute in a particular season. So I started writing them down. So when that season came around, the big man upstairs was like, go to the box, go to the pad. So I was able to go to that box and pull out all those great ideas that I had 2 and 3 years ago, because at that time it wasn't the season for the stuff that God had given me. But now it is the season. So I'm not trying to figure out or be re-inspired. Everything that I had written down, I'm now able to go back and blow the dust off of it and execute it, because it just wasn't that season. So the kind of stuff that we're discussing, when these things start happening, you get these flood of ideas, you write them down. Case in point, yes, everybody knows I wrote my first book. The ideas for my second book, I wrote down 2 years ago. Now, of course, I'm going to have to sit down and really process them again, because I wrote that stuff 2 years ago. And I looked at it last night and all the charts and graphs and stuff. I'm like, I don't understand what any of this stuff means, because I wrote it under divine inspiration. But it's fine, because like we say, the Holy Ghost will bring remembrance. So when I sit back down to get ready for the second book, which is the cornerstone book, all I'm going to do is take out all those ideas that I had written down and, pull on the big man upstairs to bring the insight back. All right, but moving along with the example. All right, so we decided we're going to start a church, Holy Deliverance Tabernacle. I think that was right. Yes. And we decided it's going to be our heart is for kids. So with that, following along with that idea, we said, okay, well, if we're going to focus on kids, we're going to have to focus on family, because that's typically where kids come from. So I was asking Shamir, what are the ideas that you came up with to revolve around the needs of children? And you said,
I would also say like a marriage, like almost like a marriage service.
Yeah, but I wouldn't start out with that, because again, let's keep it in the confines of revolving around children. Okay. So off the rip, and I'll just use my idea, off the rip, I would say, okay, well, if I'm going to focus on children, that automatically brings in daycare. Mm-hmm. Families have to have daycares. They're going to need something for their children to do. So I automatically thought of daycare, after school programs, like you said, a children's ministry. All that stuff came off the rip once I said that. So those are the things I would write down. Then and again, with your think tank, you want to write down all your ideas, because there's a step that comes after that. So like we said, she was talking about dance ministries, daycares, after school programs, things that revolve around children, because that's what we said we've been called to. Now again, with a ministry and a church, it's all encompassing. So don't think, I don't want to bring anybody in that doesn't have a family. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you still want to have a specialization, even though it's a ministry, because God has called you to some field or some aspect of the vineyard. So you want to understand what your specialization is. All right. So with that example, we wrote down, we'll say 5 things. So we wrote down, and Shamir, you got to remember this stuff, because I don't remember everything. So we wrote down after school program, daycare, youth ministry, dance ministry, we'll say a drama ministry. So we'll start with those 5 things. Now, after we've written down those 5 things, and again, you probably going to have a bunch of stuff that you write down. I would narrow that down to top 3. For sake and purpose, I started with 5. So we have those 5, and then we're going to narrow that down to the top 3. Why? Because you still want to be able to zero in on some stuff, so that when you start writing your budget, you can write your budget based off these 3 things and not 15 things. Because again, we're making this correlation today. So yes, you're going to have to write a budget. And we're going to talk about that. All right, so we've narrowed that down to the 3 things. So those 3 things I would say is the after school program, the daycare, and we'll say the youth ministry because that'll cover a lot of the other stuff. So those are the 3 things you said you want to focus on. So now we've zeroed in on 3 things. So we've already knocked out 30% of it. We've already decided the name of our ministry. We've already decided the focus, the specialization of our ministry, which we decided is children and families. We've already come up with 3 products that we want to offer. So that's 3 things. Just that fast. All right. So having that been said, now we need to come up with our mission statement. Yes, people. I talk about it all the time. Just that fast. It correlates. So let's say, and again, mission statements should be no longer than 1 paragraph. I do not advise being anything longer than 2 sentences. Because again, those of you that listen to me, you know that when I talk about a mission statement, it's your elevator pitch. So I would not make mine any longer than 2 sentences. I know it's a church and you want to have this grandiose mission statement. Keep it simple. Because again, it should be easy to understand by anyone over the age of 12. And it should be easy to remember because again, it's your calling card. Yes, even in ministry, your mission statement is important. So let's say we're batting around things for our mission statement. So, Shamir, off the top of your head, what do you think a mission statement should be for Holy Tabernacle Deliverance? Just off the top of your head. And again, your mission statement tells about what your organization does. It tells about who you are in its most simplistic form. Because I think I can think of one. So let me see what you come up with.
Okay, we are here to... my goodness, on the top of my head.
I just want to say she didn't know. She was not prepared for this today. So but this is real radio. This is impromptu. This is what we do. All right. So let's say off the top of my head, the mission statement is Holy Deliverance Tabernacle's purpose is to restore, renew, and rejuvenate the ideology of family. Our desire is to restore the family dynamic to create productive members of society. That's just off the top of my head. Yes, I'm that good.
Yeah,
that's just
nowhere near that.
That's just off the top of my head. So what did I do in that mission statement? In that mission statement, I covered the basis of what my organization does, and it was less than 2 sentences. Now, again, I've been doing this for a minute, so my brain thinks like that. It may not be that easy. It probably won't be that easy because you're going to have to really sit down and understand the dynamics of what you're trying to do with your ministry. But a mission statement is something you only do once. Now, you can revitalize it, and if you decide to do a rebranding or things of that magnitude, then you may have to revisit it. But a mission statement, once you do it, that's it. So that I just came up with, which I am not going to lie, I probably won't be able to repeat because it came off the top of my head. But once I did it that one time and I wrote it down, I can always make the reference to it. So when I'm out in the streets and I'm branding or I'm working my brand, that's what I will use when people say, what does your ministry do? What does your ministry do? Bam. Holy Tabernacle Deliverance, we are looking to restore the family unit. We're looking at trying to restore the dynamic of the family, the mother, the father, the kids, all that good stuff. So just that fast, you covered your objective. You covered what your organization does. You already have your 3 products and services you want to offer. We did that from a business standpoint. Just that quick. So on that note, we're going to take our second break, and when we come back, we're going to get into budgets and how to create that stuff for your ministry, your church. So stick around, the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
I did not know what to say.
That's fine. That's what.
I'm I would have to sit down and think about that.
And most people will. Like I said, I was only able to do that because I do it all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this stuff. I've studied this stuff so I can rattle it off because I practice it. Mm-hmm. To all my Facebook listeners, yes, I am live today. So today, as you can tell, I'm going over ministry, and I'll say nonprofits because a church is still a nonprofit. And that's the goal of today's show, is to really get into the church and how it is a nonprofit. So it should be run as such. And it should be run as a nonprofit. So you are welcome to post your questions or your comments on the Facebook Live feed or to call in at 404-355-8699. Today I am focusing on ministries. That's what we're doing today. So you definitely want to be mindful of all that good stuff today. All right. So I pose a question to all my bishops and pastors and all that stuff that may be listening in. I pose the question, what is your mission statement? Do you have a mission statement? If you don't, you really should be working on one. because it is a part of your organization. It should be the cornerstone of your organization, and it should be the thing that you keep with you that's near and dear that you can use when you're in the streets evangelizing, trying to further the mission of your organization. So I pose that question. Like I said, if you don't have it, send me an inbox message. Let's get it going. Let's start running these churches like organizations so that pastors are not having to, beg and grovel and all that good stuff for ministry.
Did it die?
Oh, maybe it did. Oh, crap. Seriously?
Are you sure? Was it charged?
Yeah, it died. I don't know if it probably did. It was at like 50%, so why would it go off?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
What about that one?
Well, that's on YouTube.
Oh.
All right, welcome back to this week's edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. And we are talking about today the correlation between ministry and, I always try to find a better term to say this, the correlation between business and ministry. Let's say that. The correlation between business and ministry. Because, again, having the conversation this weekend, I don't really think that some of my friends who are in ministry could understand when I talk about nonprofit. They don't think it applies to them. And that was disturbing for me because I'm like, it does apply to you guys because you're still running an organization. And your church is an organization. So that's the purpose of today's show. I want to show the correlation of how you can be successful in ministry using practices that organizations use on a day-to-day basis to be successful. All right, so when we left off, I was going over the fundamentals of if I was sitting down doing a consult for a business, a for-profit business. So that's what I was talking about today. Oh, that's what we were talking about before we went on the break. All right, so revisiting what we did before we went on the break. So let's say that now I'm gonna give an example, a name. So let's say that Sister Shamir has decided that God has called her to ministry. And, after much debate and much prayer, she's decided that God has called her to start a church. So we were walking through that process. So we came up with the name of her organization, which is, for lack of a better term, and this is not a knock at anybody who has the name of this church. I don't know. I don't even know where this name came from, but that's what I'm using for example today. So Sister Shamir has decided the name of her organization is going to be Holy Deliverance Tabernacle. So that was one. She decided the name of it. She decided that she wanted to focus on children. And in essence, focusing on children means she kind of has a focus on families. So she decided that her ministry specialization is families. Now, again, churches should be all-inclusive, meaning you don't discourage anybody from coming to your ministry. That's not what I'm telling you. What I'm saying to you is, just like with an organization, you need a specialization. Something that you know that God has called you to, some field of the some area of the vineyard that God has called you to. So Sister Shamir has decided that the area of the vineyard that she's been called to is children and families. So that's her specialization. So her next step would be to decide the products that she wants to offer outside, within the confines of ministry. Let me make that distinction. Within the confines of ministry. Because even when you start your ministry, there are still going to be things, certain aspects of it that you're still going to have to understand. So let's say we'll look at outreach, because a ministry is going to have an outreach department, something that they do, or still offer products and services. What are products and services? Things that your ministry offers that can enhance and better the community that it serves. So in this regard, Sister Shamir decided that she wanted to focus on, she did her think tank, which means she sat down with pen and paper and thought about all the things she would love for her ministry to offer. So she had 5. I don't want to recap those 5 because I don't think I'm going to remember. You remember the 5?
No, I don't.
All right, well, we're going to try. I know we said after school, daycare, youth department, and we allowed the youth department to encompass the other 2.
That was 3.
Well, yeah, but we took the 5 to 3. But we started with 5.
And then, the dance ministry.
Yeah, so that was part of the 5. So it was after school, daycare, youth ministry, and then when we narrowed it down, we put drama. Youth ministry. But it was originally dance and drama. Yeah. And then we said after we had those top 5, we need to narrow them down to 3. So then we said after school, daycare, and youth ministry, because youth ministry would encompass the dance team, the drama team, all that good stuff. So Sister Shamir decided that those were the 3 things the 3 products and services that she was going to focus on Again, the after-school program, the daycare, and the youth department. So what does that mean? That means that when she does her first budget, which she's going to have to do, she's going to account for those 3 products and services because she knows she wants to offer those 3 products and services. Because the first question that I posed was, what is the product? The product is a church. So the next question would be, what is the unique value in your product? So what is going to be unique about your daycare, about your after-school program, about your youth ministry? Now, this is where I will allow, if I was doing this consult with Sister Shamir, I would allow for her to not be extremely specific about what makes her unique because, in essence, she is a nonprofit, so which is kind of unique in itself because the purpose of a nonprofit is to better the socioeconomic status of something or to bring awareness to something. And in this particular regard, she's starting a church, which and ideology is to better the socioeconomic standing of her community. So that kind of makes it unique. Now, she can go a step further and say, well, hey, with the after-school program and the daycare, I want them to be Christian-based. You can say that. I want them to be Christian-based. Or she can take it a step further and say, okay, well, I want mine to be Christian-based and it caters to single mothers. So our primary function with the daycare is to cater to single mothers. So when we do our pricing point, that pricing point takes into consideration the household income of a single mother. See how specific we got just that fast? So in essence, it's kind of training your brain to think a little differently. Now, of course, this comes with research. So when she says that, she has to look at the dynamics of a single parent household, which you can easily get off a government agency website. Now, that takes me to research. And people have heard me say this before. When you're doing research and you're trying to find numbers or statistical data, you want to be mindful of the websites you visit. You do not go to Wikipedia for that kind of information. Wikipedia, let me talk on this. Wikipedia is good for trying to get quick information of a broad nature. So if I'm trying to find Angela Bassett age, I might go to Wikipedia. Or if I'm trying to find out the lifespan of a rabbit, I might go to Wikipedia. If I'm trying to find the demographic of DeKalb County, I do not go to Wikipedia. I go to a government agency site. How do you know that? Because when you type it in and it says www.dekalbcounty.gov, that's a winner because it has .gov. Or if you go to something that says .org or .edu, those are the kind of websites you visit if you're trying to get statistical data. You do not go, again, to Wikipedia. You really don't want to go to a bunch of .coms. .org, .edu, .gov. These are all safe websites that are typically maintained by either a government agency or some third-party government agency that is being armed with proper data. And you've heard me talk about margin of errors. Your margin of error when you're using numbers, statistical data from those kinds of websites is very thin. What is margin of error? Meaning the likelihood of this information being inaccurate is not very high. So you want to keep your margin of error as a percentage under like 10%. Because again, all this is going to boil down to your budget. And when you do your budget, you don't want to use inflated numbers. What are inflated numbers? Numbers that are probably not realistic. So when you sit down and do your budget, when Shamir sits down to do her budget for a daycare, she shouldn't be using numbers like billion and million. Those are inflated numbers that will not be accurate enough to bring in the amount of revenue you're going to need to cover your operating costs. I know. These terms are like dirty words. People don't like to use these words, but these are necessary words because, again, your church is going to be an organization, and if you want it to thrive, you're going to have to become familiar with these terms. All right, so keeping with the example we have. So Shamir has decided the name of her church. We did go over her mission statement, which I probably won't remember, but we did go over her mission statement. But remember, a mission statement should be no longer than a paragraph. And my recommendation is at least no more than 2 sentences, no less than 1 sentence. It should be easily understood by anyone over the age of 12. It should be that simple. It should be easy enough to remember so that anyone can recite it from memory or even under stress. All right, so you've fought half the battle already. With just what we did in those first 2 segments, you already fought half the battle. All right, so I'm going to segue because there are some questions I am going to skip because market opportunity, it's still nonprofit. You're not really contending for market per se, like a for-profit would be. So I'm going to bypass that one. Next question. How are you going to make money? Yes, you have to think about that when you're starting an organization, even a nonprofit. Because let's say you decide to apply for 501c3. They're going to ask you, how do you plan on bringing in revenue? Of course, it won't be worded like that. But in essence, you're going to see that question, and that's kind of what it's going to say. All right, so Shamir, use the example that we used, the daycare, after-school program, youth ministry. How would you plan on making money?
Well, with the daycare, I don't think I would want to charge, because it's like, if they're already having their service, I feel like it would be a nice thing to just do it for free. But for after school program, that's when I would charge. Because like for after school, I would probably take them on like field trips. And I would probably like feed them and like do like little like, field trips and like activities outside of like the church, like go swimming and stuff like that. I think that's where all the money would come in. And then you said the last one was just youth ministries. Mm-hmm. Like for that, I'm trying to think.
I mean, again, there are no wrong answers. Yeah. You're my average person today. So this is how the average person would typically think. And that's actually good because, like you said, that's a good plan. So you decided, and again, Shamir is the up-and-coming pastor today, so she's the example. So Shamir decided that she wanted to not charge for the after-school, no, you not want to charge for the daycare, but you want to charge the after-school program. That's absolutely fine. Now, in that example, which is a very good example because that can segue us to 501c3. So if your concept is, I don't want to charge for the daycare, but I do want to charge the after-school program. Now, the daycare can be something you could write a grant for. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we got there just that fast. That is something you could possibly write a grant for because you can, everything you would need to put in a grant, you can put in a grant based off a daycare. Now, I will say, because my aunt inspects daycares, shouts out to my Aunt Marilyn Rice. I'm assuming that's what she still does. But that was her job at some point in time, to inspect daycares. Now, people say that a lot. Oh, I want to start daycare. That's fine. Just know that a daycare has a lot of criteria to be ran. And you're going to have to do a lot of research to understand the dynamics of what the government expects when you are opening a daycare. Absolutely not impossible. You just have to really do your research. Now, that is one area I am not very versed in, so I'm not going to get into the dynamics of starting a daycare. And that's also not the point of today's show. All right, so Shamir decided that she wants to, let's say she said, okay, we had the consult. I said, you know what? Writing a grant for a daycare is not a bad idea, so we're going to do that. So now we're going to segue into the after-school program. So with that being said, now you have to decide a budget for your after-school program. Now, before we get there, remember, these are all, I'll say for lack of a better term, spin-offs of the church that Shamir wants to start. Now, this all started because she wants to start a church, and as you can see how fast she segued into the outreach aspects of it.
Question. When you say budget, is this like an annual budget or just an overall budget? That's
the decision you got to make. Because you can say, hey, we want to do a budget. You can do an overall budget and then break it down into quarters. So you can say, hey, our budget for the year is $1 million. But every quarter to get to that $1 million, we need to raise this every quarter. So let's say you decided, and I'm not really doing math really well when I say this. Let's say it's you know what, we're going to press pause because we got to take another break. Mm-hmm. So we're going to press pause and we're going to get into budgets when we come back. So stick around with the Leadership Band with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
But like, with budgets, what if you don't make that amount of money within that year? Do you have to like, change your like plans? Like, what if you plan to take your kids to King's Dominion every summer for like after school program during the summer? Like, what if the budget that you said was kind of low to the point where like you weren't able to do that stuff for the kids?
Well, I mean, this is where you have to set up, and I can get into that too. Because with your nonprofit, you still are supposed to set up meetings. Mm-hmm. So in those meetings, you reevaluate where you stand financially, and you decide how often you have meetings. So let's say you decide you want to have a. My dad and them used to do conference every Saturday. So every Saturday they would pass out the budget, what they've done, what they're doing, and they regroup accordingly. So that, now if you decide to meet every 6 months, then when you meet for those 6 months and you're behind for 3 of them, you run into a problem.
Yeah.
But, starting out, I would have what is called conference every Saturday. And at that meeting, y'all evaluate the money you've taken in, where you stand, are you able to meet objectives, and you adjust accordingly every Saturday. So if you say that we were trying to raise $3,000 and you meet the first week and you realize you hadn't even raised a $100 offering, all right, well, we need to redirect because we're clearly not going to hit this goal. So where do we need to alter the budget? You can do that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Nothing said, just because it's written doesn't mean it's set in stone. It can be modified.
But sometimes I wonder, like, these pastors, they have, like, all these, like, ministries and stuff, but, like, how do they have money for themselves afterwards?
Again, that's when you sit down and write the budget, that has to be included in. You have to factor in their salary. They have to be factored in when they do the budget. So when you initially do the budget, hey, we want to pay pastor $200 a Sunday. So when you're having your meetings, you can adjust accordingly. Well, we really didn't make the 200. Okay, so how are we going to make the 200 next week? You do these kinds of things. All right, we are back in our last segment, and I actually enjoyed this today. So keeping along with the example we were using, so we're going to do a quick recap because I do want to get into budgets before we leave today. So with the example we had, Sister Shamir decided that God has called her to ministry. And she first decided, okay, well, I've been called to ministry, which is all-inclusive, but, I feel like God is really calling me to families and children. So she decided that's her specialization with ministry. So keeping with that example, she sat down, she did her think tank, she came with all these great ideas about how she can help kids in ministry, through ministry, and she came to a top 3. So her top 3 was she wanted to do an after-school program, a daycare, and make sure she focused on youth ministry. So with that example, we moved into the next phase of it, which is getting into how she wants to fund these things. So she decided that she wanted to not charge for the daycare, but charge for the after-school program and allow the church to take care of the youth ministry. Now, for my leaders, we're going to get into budgets really quickly because we're in our last segment. A budget. Why do I need a budget? Because your church is an organization. Again, there's that word. Your church is an organization. And it's a nonprofit. So let me say this before I get into that too, because I don't want to leave without saying that. Now, if you have a church, you should be registered with the state that you reside in. Yes, you should. So you're going to go to your Secretary of State's website, and you're going to do the form, the incorporated form, and you're going to be incorporated and recognized as a nonprofit organization. Why do I need to do that? 1, so your state knows you're an organization. That's 1. 2, if you decide at some point you want to be 501c3, you're going to have to be incorporated. Get it out the way. Plus, it looks good. You can say, hey, we're recognized by the state as a nonprofit organization. And yes, you can put on the application religious. So you're recognized as a religious nonprofit organization. So if you have a ministry and you have not done that, you have done yourself and your ministry a disservice by not being registered with your state. Now, granted, I know some people will not do that because I've heard this before. Well, I don't register with the state because I don't want them in my business. You don't want them in your business. They find out you've been running a church and it's not registered. So let's just avoid that. So if you have not done that, today, take your happy hide, as in the words of one of my spiritual mothers, Mother Dorothy Boyd Rush, take your happy hide on the computer, register with your state through your, I forgot to say fast. Register with your state, Secretary of State of your state, get registered, I think it's $100. Get registered so that you can be recognized. If you have not done that, I expect that to be the first thing on your list when this broadcast is over in the next 10 minutes, first and foremost. All right, so let's get into your budget. Now, when you do your budget, and Shamir asked the question when we first started the broadcast, and she was like, and it's funny, but it's a true question. Well, why are pastors begging for money, and why are they taking 7 and 8 offerings? 95% of the time, their church probably does not have a budget, and their church probably does not have a board that enforces said budget. If you did, that probably wouldn't be happening. And like I said, that's not all the time, but I would say 90, and I'm going to go higher than that. 97% of the time when I sit down with ministries, because yes, I do consult for ministries, 97% of the time when I sit down with ministries and they're having financial problems, I discover really quickly, the first question I ask is, what is or what's your budget? And I get this deer caught in the headlight look. Your church, again, is an organization. You should have a budget. Now, how do I start a budget? Well, you start with the necessities. You know your church has to have lights. You know your church has to have electricity and all that good stuff. The simplistic stuff. You always start your budget there. Water, lights. Well, if you have to pay for water. Water, lights. If your church has gas. Things of that magnitude. All the necessities is how you start your budget. Well, how do I know that? All right, well, you decide where you want to reside. So let's say Shamir decides that she wants to start her ministry in her house. I know that's a foreign concept. That's the way people used to do it. Nowadays, people go find a building and they go from there. But let's say she wants to keep it simple, so she starts in her house. Okay, well, her house becomes the building for the ministry. That's fine. But your household expenses now become ministry expenses because you're running your ministry out of your house. So what is your light bill? What is your gas bill? What is your water bill? Those are the things you start your budget off because she decided to start at her house. So now those household expenses can become your ministry expenses because you're legitimately running your house, your ministry from your house. Now let's do the opposite. Let's say you decide to go get a building. Well, when you go to get the building, you can look up, you can go to the light company, the gas company, the stuff that you recognize the building needs, and look at past history of what the expenses have been for that building. Why do you want to do this? Because it helps you have less inflated numbers. So you can say, hey, you guys, I looked up the past expenses for this building, and the light bill has been in the past $200. The water bill has been $50. The electric bill has been $300. You can base it off those numbers because those numbers are actual numbers for that building. Just that fast. Again, that's where we got our basis for our budget. Now, if you look at nonprofit, when you're starting a nonprofit, it tells you operating costs. And in those operating costs, you can account for full-time employees. Ding, ding, ding. This is where the pastor comes in. If you decide that you want to do full-time ministry, now again, this is where it gets murky and people start getting in trouble. Full-time ministry means it's considered a job. And with a job comes a job description. Yes. So a pastor, now again, there is a basis by which we hold pastors to. But we're not doing bases today. We're talking about organizations being run like organizations. So the pastor can have a job description. What is that job description going to look like? Well, that's up to the board and the pastor to decide. Now, to throw out some examples. Okay, well, the board expects for the pastor to visit the sick and the shut-in, to hold Bible study 1 or 2 days a week, to be present on Sundays and to administer the word. These are all the things that can be put in a job description. Now, it sounds less silly when you say it. See how less silly it sounds when you start saying those kinds of things? Those are the kinds of things that can go into a pastoral job description. So now your pastor becomes a full-time employee, and he can be paid as such. So that goes into your budget. And you can say, hey, we want to pay the pastor starting out. And you don't have to go, because typically if you were doing a nonprofit, you would say the executive director gets paid $25,000 a year. Okay, let's say you decide you want to be a little more practical because those numbers, may not mesh well with the people that attend your ministry. So let's say you say, hey, we want to start out paying the pastor $200 a Sunday. So that's what, 2 times, there's usually 4 Sundays in a month. 2 times 4, that's what, 600? No, 800. So let's say you decide you want to pay the pastor $800 a month. That goes in the budget. And then you say, the pastor is the only full-time employee we have. So we want to pay him $200 a Sundays, which is $800 a month. Then you can go next and say, okay, well, we want to give the church another full-time employee, an administrator. And we'll pay them $50 a Sunday. That's $200 a month. So right there, that's $1,000 between your 2 full-time employees. Absolutely doable. Then you get into your actual bills. The light bill is going to be, we're going to estimate it to $300 a month. The water bill is $100 a month. We have gas, so the gas bill is another $100 a month. And just that fast, you've already built a budget, a workable budget, just to start off with. So you put that down. Before we leave, I want to say every church, and I didn't understand the dynamics of it, but I do now. Every church should have a trustee board or some kind of board for checks and balances. Because, first of all, the pastor does not know everything. That's not their job anyway. The pastor's job, look at it like this. The pastor is the talent. The board is the accountability partners. So the pastor's job really is to show up and fulfill their job descriptions. It's the board's job to come up with the budget and enforce the budget. That's their job. So think of it that way. I know, this is all crazy. These are all foreign terms today, but I promise you it made sense. So I want you to think about that because we're getting ready to leave for today, but I want you to think about that. Next Monday, we will have a guest, Bob Rogers, will be here to talk about sex trafficking in his organization from a male perspective. I know. I was amazed when I heard it too. So I will see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you for listening on The Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. All right. I'm actually glad you came today.
Yeah, me too.
All right, YouTube, thank you for tuning in today. This is my first time doing YouTube Live. So next week, you'll be able to chime in, ask questions, all that good stuff. But y'all have a great week. And I will see you same time, same place next week on Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.